Welcome to our live cast weekly. Not your ordinary church. We are glad you're here, and we want to encourage you to ask questions. We have a comment section or a chat section in the on the YouTube website that you can ask questions, and we will filter those questions if they're pertinent and relevant to the topic we're discussing tonight. We just recently found out that if you have a phone and you're viewing this on the YouTube website through your phone, that there's no option for these comments or questions, but you can download the YouTube app. So a little plug for the app. If you download the YouTube app, you can ask questions in the chat section underneath this stream. So feel free to ask questions. We'll go ahead and get right into it. My name is Jordan Suter. I am the son-in-law of Pastor David Ford, who is going to be our answer man tonight. And so we want to we format this in such a way that it's not just a normal church thing. We're not just trying to have another service or invite people to just come and view our service, but we do want to answer questions that are common about Christianity, something that you might be thinking, especially those who do not know Jesus. We want you to know the truth. We want you to meet Jesus, not just a church or some religious program. We really do care about people meeting Jesus. That's what makes all the difference. And so we ask these questions. We put these questions together specifically to give you the truth. And so again, we really encourage you to ask questions. I have a few questions we'll go through. But as you're thinking about these things, feel free to ask. So we'll just get right off the bat. Our topic tonight is, can we trust the Bible, or can the Bible be trusted? So we'll just start from a complete ignorance. What is the Bible?
What is the Bible? That's the question.
That's the very first question. What is the Bible? What are we talking about when we talk about the Bible?
All right. The 66 books of the Bible that make up the Old and the New Testament. I don't know how much we should just go into it right away in my thinking, but that's what we're talking about. Okay, I think we'll leave out what about the missing books? What about all these kinds of things? Because it's old news. It's ground that's been well worn and complained about, and it would take forever to actually work through all that. And I think, in my thinking, when I heard the topic, in my thinking, I think it's better to stick to the fact of the Bible as I just described it, the 66 books of the Bible, Genesis through Revelations, Old Testament, New Testament, mainly because I think the most important thing is not to try to prove the validity of the Bible on the basis of things that are missing. It seems like kind of a silly way of going about things. Could you imagine if we took that kind of approach with everything in the world, that we're gonna prove the validity of something by looking at all the things that it's not? And so I think to try to keep this within an hour, it would be worthwhile just to look at what is there, and then we'll worry about what isn't there later on, or never.
So maybe a better way to answer or ask the question is, okay, let's just start with this. How much about the Bible? So you didn't grow up in church. We've said this in previous podcasts, but if you're new to the podcast, Pastor Ford did not grow up in church, had experiences with church, but never was like a part of a church, and saw the church as pretty hypocritical, but eventually had an experience with Jesus Christ and became a Christian. So to go from not being a Christian and then becoming a Christian, obviously you're living your life based off of what the Bible says. Is that correct?
Well, that's exactly the distinction. That's the difference. Because it wouldn't make any sense to talk about how I had a couple of church experiences when I was younger, rejected Christianity, then I became a Christian, started going to church. It doesn't make the necessary distinction that those two experiences are not related. That's very, very important to understand, that they are not related to each other. It's not that I went to church and just rejected everything that was said, and then later on started going to church and accepted what was being said. It's a night and day difference. because the churches that I went to didn't have a basis in the Bible. They didn't have a basis in well-established first century Christian tradition. It was all very, very modern. It was a very modern take on things, something that I would say, at least the 20th century. I could probably trace it back further than that. But my point being is that it's all just sort of, modern Christianity. But what happened to me when I gave my life to Jesus is that I was catapulted back to the first century when I started to read the Bible and realized that that is what the church is supposed to be. Not the 20th century version, but the first century version. And I'm not making a mistake. I went to church during the 20th century. I know it makes it sound like I'm 100 years old, but that was back in the 1900s, 1983 to be exact.
So how much about the Bible did you know before you became a Christian?
Nothing.
I mean, did you know existed?
My favorite story to share is that when I can only imagine myself to have been around 5 years old because, well, not even 5, maybe younger, because I couldn't read. And I remember asking my mom to read a book to us. And I picked a book that I thought I picked, and she started reading it, and I noticed when she brought I'm trying to remember the details of it. I can't remember, but somehow I asked her to read us the Bible. But what I actually meant and what the book I was pointing at was the dictionary. It wasn't the Bible. And so she started reading from the Bible, and first of all, I looked at the book. It was not the same book that I had picked. It was a different book. I'm not sure how I got the word Bible into it. I don't know if she prompted me and said, do you want me to read the Bible? And I said, yeah, or something along those lines. It must have been something like that because I couldn't read. And so that's the full extent of my understanding of the Bible is about 10 minutes of my mom reading it and saying, Mom, that's the wrong book. I want you to read this book over here.
Do you remember what she read in the Bible?
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all. I just remember she started reading and turning pages in a book that I hadn't chosen. That was the thing. The Bible was the dictionary that I was pointing at, because it was a big, thick book, and I probably because I didn't want to go to bed, and so I figured, well, this will keep us for a while. I don't know, but so that's it. I mean, yeah. Okay. In a nutshell, it wasn't the book I picked. The book that I picked was red, all the same color. The book that she took out had colored pictures on it, and it wasn't the same book. And so that was the confusion to me. As she starts reading it, it was like, you're reading the book that I didn't pick. So
you've been a Christian for what, 36 years?
37.
37 years?
Yeah.
You've been a pastor for how long?
27.
27 years. So, okay, so kind of a random question, but still related. What would you tell yourself now, having been a pastor for over 20 years, almost 30 years, what would you tell yourself if you met yourself all the way back then? You'd absolutely
5 years old?
I know, like ignorant about the Bible, before you became a Christian, not when your mom read you the book,
okay.
but like when you became more aware.
Okay, let's say 16. That was when I first went to church and kind of rejected the whole thing over that next 8 months or so.
Okay.
I would definitely have something to say to myself back then. What you're involved in now, that is religion. And what you want to be involved in is a personal relationship with God. And I would definitely turn myself to reading the Bible. Objectively, without judgment. I mean, that's very, very key. Without judging it, without being angry about it, without being emotional, but exclusively from the standpoint of read it and listen to what it says, and then decide whether it is sensible or nonsensible. I think that's a better way of putting it, because I've heard people talk about the Bible from the standpoint of, like one person, we talked about this before, talking about the person who said, I can't remember the exact context of it. The atheist had said, I tried this and I didn't agree with it or something like that, and then I tried Christianity and it didn't make sense to me, and so, which kind of let the cat out of the bag that the other one she was more willing to experiment with, but with Christianity she wasn't willing to experiment with because she couldn't get past the fact that it didn't make sense to her.
So so expound on that a little bit, because you mentioned the difference between religion, and obviously we're talking in the context of the Bible, but you mentioned the difference between religion and having a personal relationship with Jesus. Now, how is it that people can go to church and read the Bible? And this is obviously, this is a big controversy if you think about it, but you can read the Bible or hear the Bible, and then other people can read the same Bible, but both have a completely different experience with Jesus. One is living in religion, the other one has what you're calling a relationship with Jesus.
Well, I think that's the real catch, is that the idea, and I talk about this a lot, the idea of reading the Bible. I really question the integrity of an individual who will say, "I've read the Bible, and this is what I think about it," and then begin to explain things that aren't really even in the Bible. To me, that's an integrity breakdown.
Can you give me an example of that?
For example, somebody says, "I've read the Bible," and well, let's put it in the kind of religious perspective. I've read the Bible, and I don't believe in healing, for example. That would be a good example, because the Bible is filled with healing. All the Gospels are. That's the foundation of the Gospels, is healing. Jesus healed people. That's I think even somebody who doesn't know anything about Jesus, or knows little about Jesus, they know that Jesus healed people, or even allegedly that he healed people. And so I don't believe in miracles, because the Bible doesn't teach miracles. That's what I'm talking about. The Bible obviously teaches miracles, because that's where we get this idea of healing. And so, and then the book of Acts as well, talks about healing as well. And so, to have a doctrine or a belief that healing isn't for today, and to come up with these, arguments that talk about things like how it passed away with the apostles and these kinds of things, when we have history, even outside of the Bible, it still talks about miracles, and even the Catholic Church to this day, in order to be a saint, there has to be miracles. And so it'd be really hard for anybody to become a saint then, if miracles are a requirement of sainthood. And so, it's you can't logically, say, "I've read the Bible and this is the conclusion I've come to about miracles." So that's what I'm talking about, is from that standpoint of the issue of integrity, the breakdown of integrity, is that the Bible may teach it, you may not like it, and you may not even want it to exist, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And that's, I think, it's being disingenuous.
So you're saying that basically picking certain parts of the Bible that you want to agree with, or that you want to say I'm okay with, and then removing other parts, or saying there are other parts I don't agree with, is that what creates a religious person?
Well, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about being disingenuous, because is it really integral for someone to read a compilation of books and say, "I like this one, but I don't like that one"? Is it okay to kind of function like that? We don't do that anywhere else in life. Debating the truth of a thing or the value of a thing is fine, but to say that it's not there, or it doesn't exist, or you're reading into the texts, when the words are literally there. Probably another good example is the issue of hell. Is that people who say, "I don't believe in hell, the Bible doesn't speak of hell." And then when you start quoting them scriptures about hell, they say, "Oh, that means this, that means that, this means the other thing, and that doesn't mean that." I know Jesus talked about being cast into hell, and he talked about it as if it was a real place, but trust me, that's not what he meant. What he meant was that it's an allegory about the struggles and the difficulties that people have in life. And it's like, just make it up then. Why don't we just make up the whole thing? Why don't we just make up entirely what the Bible says? And the truth of the matter is, I do believe that that's what has happened, and that is what I would describe as I'm calling it 20, but I'm going to change it to 21st century, because hopefully most of the people listening are millennials. But the 21st century church is, you just make it whatever you want it to be, and you just say whatever you want to believe, and then say that's in the Bible.
So how is it that you have so many, we'll just call them sects, but different people that call themselves Christians, but like you have like the Baptists, and then you have like the Jehovah's Witnesses, and then you have Mormons, and then you have the Christians, and you have the Catholics, all people who say they believe in the Bible. So how is somebody supposed to look at the Bible and say, okay, this is a book of truth, when there's kind of division when it comes to believing in the Bible? Like there's these different, the religions, different religions. How is it that different religions come out of the same book? And basically, really, the aim of that question is, how do you determine who's actually the true biblical one?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that was the thing I discovered when I became a Christian, is that I read the Bible. I'm the very first, I'm actually going to be talking about this, I think this Wednesday, in my sermon this Wednesday.
Plug for Wednesday night.
Plug for Wednesday, shameless plug for Wednesday night sermon. As I started to read the Bible, I thought, how come churches don't know this? It seemed to be very straightforward. I mean, it didn't seem to be too complicated. It seemed to me that there were things that were written, and I thought, this isn't what went on in the churches that I had visited. In fact, I learned after I became a Christian, because I actually wrote a letter to one of the former pastors, a youth pastor, because I thought he would be really excited that I had actually become a Christian, because I pretty much told him that I thought the whole thing was nonsense. And asked a few questions over the years, but it was like, I don't know about any of this. But so I thought he'd be really happy, and he didn't even respond. And then his wife actually responded, and when she responded, she said, our church doesn't believe the things that you put in your letter. And I was like, what do you mean the church doesn't? I'm telling you what happened to me. I'm saying this happened to me. I thought you'd be really excited about this. But that's how deep theology or a belief, I'm not sure of the right words to use, but a theology of accommodating, that's the way that it's described. An accommodating theology can go so deep within a person that even somebody who they know that was not interested in Christianity becomes a Christian, and they're all excited about it, but their theology, they're so steeped in that theology that they cannot accept that person actually became a Christian. To me, that's weird. I mean, to say the least, that's weird.
So how do you, because it kind of sounds like you could kind of just say, hey, good for you. We don't believe that, and we're Christians too, but good for you. Like, how do you determine, does that mean that the like the church you sent the email to, the person you sent the email to, does that mean that they weren't Christian, or that they just believed a different way? And then doesn't that kind of create kind of a wedge in the middle of the Bible if you guys are both believing in the same book, but then there's like this division between the two?
Well, that's the point. And so the kind of the topic that you chose for the podcast is, can the Bible be trusted? I would say churches that function the way I described, the answer would be no, because they modify their beliefs even though the Bible says other things. And so they don't trust the Bible, because if they did trust the Bible, then we would believe the same things, because they're not like the example that I use, and I wish I could come up on the top of my head of an example that everybody would be familiar with. But the issue of hell, for example, I mean that's a perfect example. Anybody who's ever read the Bible and read Luke 16, or in the book of Revelations in chapter 20, and read about the lake of fire and that burns with brimstone, and the smoke of their torment ascends forever. I mean, these are very graphic descriptions. To say, no. Your problem is that you're not a 1700s scholar who doesn't eat, drink, or sleep, just reads the Bible. And if you were one of those, then this would make perfect sense to you. It's like, no, it says what it says. And if the Bible is going to be trusted, then you have to trust that it says what it says. You can't say, this is my interpretation of what that says. In other words, I know what the words insinuate, but I reject that, and I'm going to insert my own meaning to those words, just based on my own beliefs. That, to me, is to say that the Bible cannot be trusted. I'm saying that, yes, it can, so long as you take it at face value. If you want to try to read into it and try to make it say something that it doesn't say, then you're going to have a hard time. But I think if you would just be honest and say, okay, let me just read this, you'll see. You'll see. I mean, and that's the thing that was such a mind blower to me, is that as I read the Bible, reading it from beginning to end, it was so terribly consistent. But there were so many different authors, and it was written over so many different time periods. But yet there's this consistency, this thread of consistency that goes through it. That when I read, I'm not closed-minded, and so when I heard there's a book of this or a book of that wasn't included in the Bible, well, I immediately found them and started reading them, and it made perfect sense to me why they weren't included, because they were another book. It was another book. It didn't follow the flow of the Bible. It was a writing. It was another writing. It may have been a writing of that same era, but it was a writing that was not consistent with the Bible story. The Bible has a story. It's about the Jews and the children of Israel and how they progressed through the pages, from Adam and into God's people, which started with Abraham, and then from there Isaac, Jacob, and then Jacob becomes Israel, and then his descendants are the children of Israel. They are God's people, and then how the story follows for the next several thousand years, the story of this people and their journey through life with God, and how they interacted with non-believing, not non-believing, but people groups that had their own gods, and how that all played out. At the end, we get to where we are today, where all of those gods are gone now. None of those gods endured the test of time. They're all gone. And so, the god of Molech that is mentioned in the Bible, Baal is mentioned in the Bible. Those gods are gone now. They're gone. Nobody believes in them anymore. But yet, the one God prevailed. And so you see this all the way through up to the first century. Well, up to 400 years before Christ, and then we have 400, what's referred to as 400 silent years. Don't even ask me to explain that, because that's I can't. Nobody can. You can't explain what doesn't exist. You can present, hypotheses, but you can't explain it. You can't explain something when there's an absence of evidence. And so it's silly to even try to explain that. Though there are writings, and that's where the book of Maccabees comes in. There are writings, but those writings are just talking about people who just, it's like the only way I could describe it is it would be like picking up a church, like we have a church magazine, and reading the church magazine, and saying this is actually a missing part of the Bible. It's not a missing part of the Bible. It's just the church magazine. It focuses on what God is doing and who God's touched and what's happening in certain scenarios, but it's not a biblical writing, and that's why it wasn't included. And so it's not rocket science when you read these books. You read Maccabees, the book of Enoch. I think there's a Gospel of Timothy, Gospel of Peter, I believe. But when you read these, they're not necessary. It's not like there's in those writings is some great understanding of wow, if this book was included, it would totally change the landscape of Christianity. No, not only would it not change the landscape, it wouldn't even change one of the pixels. It's just not necessary.
So you mentioned a couple of things, and I wanted to go into a little bit of the content part of it. How do you, maybe you can talk from personal experience, how does someone deal with the harshness of the Bible? Because if you talk about, there are things in the Bible that you read, and it's just like, gosh, man, why? And you hear this said, like, how is it that a loving God can do something like that?
You have to read the Bible from cover to cover, and then you have to do a little research during those times to get context. those societies are known to us. You can read about those societies. They're not biblical writings. You can read about the Amalekites, the Philistines. You can read about these people, and you can read, and it's very clear that these are people that were given a fair warning about what would happen to them, and they decided, bring it. It's probably one of the most interesting stories of talking about this kind of thing is the story about the taking over of Jericho, because Jericho is the first city, and God says, destroy it utterly. All the inhabitants, everything, everyone, all the way down to everything. I mean, everything. It's like, wow, that's pretty heavy duty. Everything, literally everything. But yet, when you look at the actual, the story, and you follow the story through, when the spies go to scope out Jericho, they land at the house of a woman who's a prostitute, and they come to her, and she hides them. They're panicking because they're known to be in the city. They've been discovered, and so they're kind of running for their lives, and they just kind of make their way to this prostitute. The prostitute says, "Okay, yeah, up here," puts them up, hides them. And then the city guards come. She makes up a big story, sends him on a wild goose chase, and then brings him down and says, okay, now listen, we know about the God of Israel. What has happened to other enemies of God. We know the stories. We know the overthrow of these cities. And the truth is that we're disheartened. I don't remember the exact words that she used, but that's the basic idea, is as a city, we're disheartened. But so they're just waiting to be destroyed. The city's just waiting to be destroyed. But this woman, that's the thing that's so ironic about it, is she's a prostitute, is she says, listen, I've shown you kindness, and all I'm asking is for you to spare my life. And they say, absolutely, this is not a problem. We will spare you. This is not a problem. Well, why didn't the rest of them do that? No, instead, they want to find the spies. They want to kill the spies just for being there. They want to kill these spies. So listen, if you know that you're going to be overthrown and your whole city is going to be destroyed, and two representatives from the party that is going to destroy your city, and you absolutely know they are going to destroy your city come, are you going to try to arrest them and try to hold them in custody? Would that be a wise thing to do? You're already in trouble. You're already going to lose everything. And so the point that I'm making here is that this is their fault. They were destroyed because they decided that they were, well, you know what? Maybe we'll get destroyed, but we're going to make our stand. And so that's what they did, is they made their stand and were defeated. And the woman was not, because she said, listen, the God of Israel is stronger than all of our gods, and we're going to give into that. I'm going to, my family, we are going to harbor you, we're going to shelter you, we're going to send you on your way. Just remember me when you come to destroy the city, because we know God's going to give you the city. And isn't that funny how somebody can say something like that, but she's not a follower, she's not a believer, but she can say those kinds of things. And so when you know the stories, when you know the stories themselves, you'll understand that these people, they chose that. That was their choice, is they said, we're going to stand against God, because the nations that didn't do that, God didn't destroy.
So what about, God sending people to hell and stuff like that? Like, how do you, explain that to somebody? Just looks at that like, I know a lot of good people who aren't Christians. How is it that you can look at that and say, yeah, God's going to send them to hell?
Because the biggest problem is that we are choosing to define what good means. And good is us. Good is an external standard that doesn't include us, that we strive for. Good is us. Nobody says to me, listen, I don't want to go to hell. I don't think I should go to hell because I'm trying my best to live up to the standard that God has made that he calls good. No, they always say, I am a good person. And then they say, I try to do the best that I can do. So in other words, They already fit the bill for being a good person, even though they're not doing what a good person needs to do. But because they're trying to be a good person, that automatically means they're a good person. And so that doesn't work anywhere else, you know. And so when the Bible talks about hell as the ultimate punishment of that, I think it's exactly the same thing as the situation that I described with Jericho. Jericho was going to be destroyed, and they chose to be destroyed rather than to surrender to God. And that really is where people are today, is they surrender or they don't surrender to God. They simply decide that they're going to take what comes and say, it's not fair, I don't believe in it, I don't agree with it, but I'm going to take what comes. And so, okay, then you can't be upset about hell if you're ready and willing to take what comes.
So how do you explain? I've had this conversation before, and people, one guy in particular was like, he was like moving for, like really excited about the idea of being a Christian. He's, God's really doing something in his life. But he said something, and this actually, and I don't know all the, backstory behind what was going on with this guy, but he literally said, I'd read something in the Bible, and I can't get down with that. I can't get down with God being against homosexuals. I have a lot of good friends who are homosexuals, and I just can't get down with the fact that they're just going to hell for that.
Well, see, this is...
What would you tell somebody like that?
Yeah, this is the problem when you don't read the Bible. God isn't against homosexuals. You say, oh, well, but he judged Sodom and Gomorrah. He judged Sodom and Gomorrah not because they were homosexuals, but because they were wicked, and part of that was being a homosexual. That was the outflow. They were wicked, and God judged them for their wickedness, because this is a group... I don't even think a homosexual would see people from Sodom and Gomorrah as being good people. Because could you imagine walking down into San Francisco? Let me just give this as an example, into the Castro area, because that's a predominantly homosexual area. And so you walk down there. You've never been there before. You walk down there, and out come a bunch of men and say, well, welcome. Okay, step into this bedroom. And you go say, what? No, well, we're all going to have our way with you, every one of us. I don't think that would appeal to the homosexual community. I just can't see that. But this is exactly what happened in Sodom. And so Sodom, the issue was not homosexuality. So we can put the whole Sodom and Gomorrah aspect of things aside, because they weren't judged because they were homosexuals. They were judged because they were wicked. I'm not saying it doesn't include homosexuality. The point that I'm making is that it was their wickedness that got judged. The homosexuality part of it was only part of the larger problem. So now to move forward into the New Testament issue, God still is not against homosexuals. He is against homosexuality. That's a problem. And this is a hard one to work on, and I think this probably goes beyond the idea of can the Bible be trusted? Maybe, maybe not, I'm not sure. But when you understand the Bible position on homosexuality, it makes it clear. Because nowhere do I read anywhere in the Bible where there is a hierarchy of sins. And fornication, from my reading of Scripture, fornication which is sex outside of marriage, all sex outside of marriage, is across the board equally as punished as homosexuality. So it's not that God hates homosexuals any more than he hates fornicators or heterosexuals that aren't married. Okay, so heterosexuals that aren't married, if you say God hates homosexuals, then you have to say God hates heterosexuals that are not married. You'd have to say the exact same thing. You can't separate the two out. And so that's where I see the problem in that, is that idea, because it's making the Bible say something that it doesn't say. Okay, we can talk about should homosexuals go to hell, should fornicators go to hell, should anyone go to hell. We can have a conversation about that, but to say that God hates those people, you have to conclude that God hates everyone, because everyone is a sinner who doesn't have Jesus as their Lord and Savior is going to hell. So that means God hates everybody. So that's why it's important to understand what the Bible actually says about things, and why I think the Bible can be trusted. Because when you understand all the things that the Bible is saying, it's not coming down on particular people groups or particular styles of life or particular preferences. None of that comes into play when we're talking about what the Bible actually says about humanity in general and salvation, eternal life, heaven and hell.
So how would you instruct somebody, or how would you recommend to somebody to start reading the Bible? Well, let me ask you this. How long did it take you to start understanding the Bible when you first
Right away.
became a Christian?
Yeah, right away.
Okay, so
right away.
because you're talking about these issues that some people might even start with when they come into Christianity. You know, that okay, I'm gonna give this thing a shot. I'm gonna come and try to read the Bible and understand this thing. But they've come with this, I mean, because it's kind of shouted from all over the place. You get people that are saying, oh, God's against homosexuals, and you have all these movements now that are creating an emotional tend towards those things. And so people are sympathizing with them. So then they come in, they try to become a Christian. They see in the Bible where it says God, you know, no homosexual enter the kingdom of heaven. All
they
that.
don't see that in the Bible.
So
that's the problem. They don't see that in the Bible. They hear Christians say it.
Okay.
Very different.
Okay.
Very different.
So now they come across that. They come across scriptures that they have a hard time with.
No.
How do you?
They're not going to come across scriptures that they have a hard time with from the perspective of what they have been hearing about what the Bible says. So in other words, they're not going to find the scripture that says homosexuals are going to hell. They're not going to find that. What they will find is a list of things. In that list, which covers just about every walk of life, then says in that list, homosexual. But it talks about partiers, it talks about angry people, it talks about cowards, it all in that same place. It talks about people who are jealous, all in that same portion of Scripture. You can't single it out. You can't say, no, see, right there, he says that he's against homosexuality. No, it's in context of a whole bunch of other things that are going to fall under the same judgment, which includes something as just simply, if you're the kind of person that you're a jealous person. So here's the comparison. So when God looks down at a person who all their life they've looked at people and said, "Oh, yeah, it's easy for you to say that. Look what you have." Oh yeah, well, whatever. You're just lucky. You were born with a silver spoon. Yeah, well, no, well, look at your parents. Look at your education. Look at all the benefits that you've had in life. Come on. Okay, so and this is the way they are all the time. They're going to stand before God, and he's going to say, "I never knew you. Depart from me into a lake of fire." So I don't, to try to say that somehow there's this other level of God's hatred towards homosexuals when the mention of homosexuals is in the very same list. It's in the very same list. And you say, "Oh, but there are other places that talk about it." Yeah, there are other places that talk about homosexuality. They talk about the progression of sin where people end up in homosexuality. Yes, but what is the real thing that God's upset with? If you go back into the verses that I'm referring to in Romans, is because they were thankless. That's the thing that really got God upset, is they were ungrateful. That was the issue. The issue was ungrateful. Okay, fine. You're going to be ungrateful. I'm going to let you do whatever you want to do. You just do whatever you want to do. And the outflow of that outflowed into immorality, sexual immorality, ultimately in homosexuality, ultimately in bestiality. There's this perversion of the act of marriage between a husband and a wife. But God's saying the reason why you did that is not because you're incredibly wicked. The reason why you did that is because I just gave up. I just let you go there. So this is not about God's hatred. It's not about how God hates people or God has this problem with people. It's that God said, if you want to live in sin, I'm going to let you. And not only am I going to let you, I'm going to let you believe that it's okay. And so this is very, very, very different than the idea of God hating people and tossing people into hell because they don't agree with him. It's not, it's just not, you cannot, and this is what you'll discover when you read the Bible. This is what I discovered reading the Bible. I read the Bible, and I didn't have a stand on homosexuality. I wasn't anti-homosexuality. In fact, I was about 3 years earlier, I think it was, when I was actually considering the merits of homosexuality, because I was one of those kids that I hear people when they talk about this. I was one of those kids, probably TMI here, but I was one of those kids that would look at male actors and be attracted to them, their facial features, their lips, things like that. And, so as I grew up, and got old enough to start, down the road of, teenage into my early adult years, I got bored of the party scene. I got bored of going to clubs. I got bored of taking home women from the clubs at night. I got tired of it just became boring. It was like, is this all there is? And so to me, it was like, hey, I experimented with drugs. I experimented with heterosexual sex. Why not experiment with homosexual sex? It was just, and looking back on that now, I realize in looking at those things that it really was just the progression of experimentation. I was just moving from A to B to C to D and carrying on. And I had no biblical framework to even, that it was a car without brakes, And so, but once I became a Christian, I started reading the Bible, I grew brakes. It's the only way to describe it. I grew brakes, and I realized that a lot of the things that I was doing and a lot of the way that I was living my life, I needed to apply the brakes. Otherwise this would put me in a position to where I would have to accept the fact that I'm going to go to hell for all eternity, or I'm going to stop doing those things. And whatever, no matter how hard it was an issue of difficulty. It was an issue of imperative. So, but that's what the Bible did. The Bible did that.
So why should someone read the Bible? Somebody who's never read the Bible, somebody who doesn't live by the Bible, why would you tell somebody to read the Bible in the first place?
If they don't care about God, I would not say that. If they don't, I don't care if God's real or not. I want to live my life the way I live my life. I want to do what I want to do. I wouldn't recommend them.
So is the Bible like a set of rules to live differently by?
No. It's a revelation of who God is. And if you don't want to know who God is, then there's no point in getting a revelation of who God is, because every time you come to parts of God's character that you don't like, you're just going to dismiss it. And so you're never going to come to the place to where it's even important to you.
So how does just real quick, how does knowing more about God change how we should live?
Okay, that requires an in-between state. And what I mean by that is that if you don't care about God, then it doesn't matter how you live. In terms of that, you're your own man, your own woman, do whatever you want. Not that there are no consequences to it, because there is eternal consequences to it. But if you don't care, then it doesn't matter. But my recommendation to reading the Bible is this: if you have a curiosity about God, there's something going on inside of your intellect that you just cannot just switch off the idea of the existence of God. Well, the Bible's the best place to go to understand the only revelation of God. Now, I know that will ruffle feathers to say that, but when I say the only revelation of God, what I mean is that we have a lot of traditions about God that are not based on holy books. It's interesting to me that people will quote and talk about Hindu scriptures, which they're not scriptures. I mean, they don't, even Hindus don't see them as scriptures, or other, fringe religions. When I say fringe, is not the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish faiths, because they're all based in the same book for all intents and purposes. And so that book is the Bible. And so I know there's a Quran, and the Quran is believed to be an additional book. But you still, if you just start with the first book, you will have a hard time getting to the other religious writings, because they don't see that Hindus don't live by scriptures. I remember one time I was talking to a guy, and I said, so I'm familiar, because I'd done a little history on Hindus, and I said, so I understand that Hindus believe in thousands of gods, and I said, I think something like the neighborhood of 10,000. He said, yes, and counting. Which that what does that tell you?
Yeah.
What does that tell you? And he was saying it half jokingly, but at the same time, it is realistic. Is that they're always discovering new gods, But that's because nothing's set in stone, and so Christianity is set in stone, and it's not changeable. And when you read the Bible, this is what happens when you read the Bible. You read the Bible, and you begin to peel back what I'll call the onion layers of religious beliefs, because you'll say, well, if this book is true, this church is not, this church is not, this belief is not, that belief, and you'll be able to actually peel off. When I say church, I mean denomination. It's probably a better way of describing it. This denomination is not part of the mix. This one's not. You'll begin to peel these things away, because the Bible you start reading it, and you realize the Bible is actually speaking against people like this. And I don't really want to go into the details of where that is and what that is, because it has to be read in context to understand. But, the Bible talks about different traditions, honoring the Sabbath, And so, and Paul says, let no man, to try to deceive you into false worship through the keeping of Sabbaths and things like this. And so Paul was quite convinced that at his period of time that there was no Sabbath anymore. Well, that really screws up the Seventh-day Adventists, because they still believe in the Sabbath. But Paul spoke specifically against the idea of people holding you to a tradition of a particular Sabbath. So they're gone. And you say, oh, that's pretty rough to say that. But this is the point that I'm making, is that idea, is that as you read the Bible, that happens with all of them. It doesn't just happen with one or two or three. It happens with all of them, and you start realizing, wow, so what is exactly the church? I mean, what is the church? And then you realize that the church is what happened in the first century. And you learn that from the Bible. And so then you start looking for a church like that. And you find that there are not many. And that's the thing. Hence, the podcast, Not Your Ordinary Church, is because you will find that not only is it very difficult to find a church that patterns after the first century, that even the best of churches don't want to be, many of the members of the churches don't want to be like the first century church. They don't want to be like that. Don't put emotion into this. It's that I don't want to live like that. I don't want to live like that. I don't want to get up every day and have on my agenda that I need to be spreading the gospel. I'm going to talk about, again, shameless plug for my sermon Wednesday. I'm going to be preaching about this again on Wednesday, is that this is the idea, is people, they don't want that. They don't want that kind of Christianity. They love the religious version. That's the smorgasbord pick and choose. They like that one. But the problem is when you live in a country that's antagonistic towards Christianity, that doesn't fly. That's the first type of Christianity that dies. You take, go to Somalia, and try to find denominational churches. That's they just they're fighting with each other over their various doctrines on baptism and Sabbaths and things like. Try to find that in a place where Christianity is illegal. You're not going to find it. They don't exist. They're not there, and the reason they're not there is because they're not the real thing. The only thing you're going to find in places like that is a first century type Christianity. You're not going to find the kind of thing that we see today. You're going to see what the Bible describes, because they already lived that. They were already there in the first century. The first century, the whole world was like that. It wasn't just Jerusalem. The whole world was like that. Everywhere they went, they had to fight against the influence of Judaism everywhere they went.
So doesn't the Bible have contradictions in it? I'm sure you thought I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. No. Next question.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. There are no contradictions. And when you have read it from cover to cover with an objective point of view, without an axe to grind, you'll see what I mean about the idea of there being...
Define objective real quick.
That you're not trying to prove your own premise.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. Is that you're not going, okay, I'm going to find the scripture here. Like one of the things that's used a lot in the comparison between homosexuality and in the Old Testament is the eating of shellfish. Because it says that eating shellfish is an abomination. But and so that's the kill. That's the kill of the argument. It's over. Touche. If you think homosexuals, practicing homosexuals will go to hell, then you have to believe that shellfish eaters are going to go to hell as well. And so the problem with that is that when you take that in context of the time that it was spoken of, it's called the Old Covenant. And this is something that I hardly ever hear actually said correctly, because usually people fall into two categories. We believe the whole Bible, and that's all there is to it. It's all relevant. You need to keep all the commandments as well as all the New Testament commandments. You need to keep them all, and and all that. Or you have the other one that's, oh, no, you don't have to keep any of the commandments anymore. It's all over. They don't matter. They don't mean anything. And it's neither of those two things. It's the fact that that it's broken into covenants. That a covenant is a contract, and so when you sign a lease, so I sign a lease. Let's say for a house, that lease goes for a year, and I'm paying here in the Bay Area $4,500 a month for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that comfortably fits 3 people and 2 cats, and no more. But that's the Bay Area. But then, after that year's up, well, now my landlord comes and says, it's now $5,000. I can't go, wait, no, that's not fair. That's not fair, because we signed a contract. That's an old contract. That's an old contract. That contract doesn't apply. And if you want to stay in the house, then we need to look at either a new contract, or you stay month to month and just hope for the best. And I keep raising the rent as often as I want. And so I say, no, of course I don't want that. So I'm going to get into a new contract. Well, that new contract nullifies the old contract. But I now have to pay $5,000 a month. So I can't say, well, I don't have to pay $4,500 a month because our new contract doesn't say that. You're right. I mean, you're right, but that's a dumb argument because I'm actually paying more now. Well, the new covenant is a new contract, and it's even more strict because that contract is on the basis of who you are as a person in your relationship with Christ. And so now the stakes are way, way, way higher. So to say, oh, I don't have to keep those Old Testament things, well, homosexuality is a New Testament thing, but shellfish isn't. And there are a lot of things like that. Like I mentioned this, jealousy, envy, murder, all those kinds of things. They have their place in the Old Testament, but they've been established again in the New Testament as well.
So how would you recommend somebody to start where would you recommend somebody start reading the Bible? So okay, we've let's just say we have somebody that's convinced. They're like, okay, I want to know more about this, and then they pick up the Bible. What this is? You mentioned 66 books. The Bible is split into 66 books, but it's one book.
Right.
Where should they start?
From a practical standpoint, this is what I always tell people, just simply because it's very practical. I actually read Matthew. I started from the New Testament, read all the way through the New Testament, then went back and read the Old Testament. So I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then went my way through the rest of it. If you are a reader, actually, I can't even say it that way. If you're excited about wanting to read the Bible, because I wasn't a reader, but I was excited to see what the Bible had to say, because when I started reading it, it just kind of grabbed me, and I just wanted to read it, which was very unusual, because it's like how a lot of people started, how people read the Harry Potter series, is that people who never read a thing in their lives all of a sudden just devoured Harry Potter. That's how I was when it came to the Bible, is that I just devoured it. I hated reading, but I just devoured it. And so I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then I read into the book of Acts and went on from there. And so for those who maybe are not as ferocious of a reader as I was of the Bible, I think the best place to start is in John. And the reason is because then that way you get a quick, not a summary, but you get the kind of first gospel, not first in number, but the gospel itself, the first version of the gospel, or let's throw away the word first. The gospel. You get the gospel, what Jesus came to do. You get that. And a lot of that overlaps in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so there are parts that don't, but then there are a lot of parts that do. And so start there in John, and boom, just go right through to Revelations. And then come back and read the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then with the Old Testament, I just start from Genesis and read. You're gonna have a rough ride, because when you read Genesis and Exodus, it just seems to sail. And then when you get to Leviticus, you're like, oh my word, somebody put molasses, here, and it gets a bit difficult. And then Numbers isn't too much better, and Deuteronomy is not too much better. And then you hit Judges, and it starts to pick up steam again. And so you start making your way through Judges, and I mean, the thing about Judges that's hilarious to me is you start reading Judges, you go, wow, people were really messed up, And I mean, start doing really weird stuff. And the Bible says that every man did right what was right in his own eyes. That's how it begins, the book of Judges. And you're like, yes, they did. Absolutely, they did. You're like, what? Some guy's concubine. The fact that he has a concubine is weird enough as itself. But his concubine gets raped literally to where she's almost dead. And so the owner of this concubine, or husband, I mean, I'm not even sure what you would call it, decides, well, okay, let's kill her and then cut her up into several pieces and send her to the tribes of Israel. And you're like, what in the world is going on here? So very crazy stuff. Very, very crazy stuff.
How many times have you read the Bible?
I don't know. I just over and over and over and over, because I've read it so many times now that I'm familiar with it. And now I'm reading to try to find something that maybe I missed. It's not, I very rarely, and this is not, don't think of this in arrogance. It really is a reflection of how little people read the Bible. But I very rarely, the reason why I say very rarely is because I can remember times where it's happened, 2 or 3 times, where I've heard somebody quote a scripture that I've not heard before, and I'm like, I don't want that to be the case. I want to learn, I want to learn more, because it's cool. I mean, I've learned so much about God over the last, 37 years. It's just very, very cool. And the more I learn, now it's to the point to where there's just such a confidence that I have in the reality of God. I'm not going to change my mind or be worried that I made the wrong choice should I find myself on a deathbed, and maybe I'm, old and have 6 months to live. I'm not going to change anything about what I believe or anything. I know that with an absolute confidence. The reason is because I've walked through those kinds of events with friends of mine. I mean, I'm 58 now. I'm not 20. I've experienced a lot of life. I've experienced the death of friends. I've experienced the slow decay of friends and family. And I know that that this is the truth.
How can you read the Bible so many times over and over and over? I mean, to somebody who has never read the Bible, how do you tell them to do that? That sounds exhausting, to read it over and over and over and over. I don't know of any other normal books that I've ever read more than once, actually maybe 2 or 3, purely just for the same reason of okay, I want to hear that story again.
Okay, so part A, I said about never hearing a scripture that I've not heard before. But something that happens all the time, and it happens to me personally, is that I always see something that I didn't see before in the scriptures that I'm familiar with. And I think, wow, there's nothing for me. I write sermons. I love studying. I hated reading when I was younger. I grew to love it. And now, I love studying. Absolutely love. It's something I would have never dreamed I would ever say. I love studying the Bible. And the reason is because I start to put together an idea for a sermon. I'll have this idea. I'll have some sort of basic idea of where I'm going. And then I'll start to read scriptures and think, wow, I didn't realize the Bible had this much stuff to talk about on that subject.
Okay, we are at our last minute, and so I want to, you have literally like 10 seconds to throw in a question. We are going to close up. Can the Bible be trusted? This is something that we encourage you to find out, and we have given you evidences and we've given you personal experience. The Bible is not just a normal book. It is a book that tells you about who God is, and so we encourage you who are curious to explore. And you can ask questions. We encourage you also, you can add comments to this video if you're watching this post, or if you've been watching it during, you felt kind of shy to ask a question, please go ahead and put your question in the comment section, and we will respond to those questions to you personally. And feel free to click the notification bell, and the next time we have a live event, you will be welcome to come and you'll be notified. We appreciate you coming, and we really are glad you're here.